Have the opportunity to connect with all of you, digitally, of course, and we have a very special morning planned for you. My name is Kevin Lammerum. I am formerly the education lead for the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, and I currently teach at the University of Winnipeg here in Manitoba, in the heart of Turtle Island. Of course, I would like to acknowledge, to start in a good way, that we are on Treaty 1 territory in the homeland of the Métis Nation. And we here in Winnipeg receive our clean drinking water from Shoal Lake 40 in Ontario. So it's very worthwhile to acknowledge the gift of life coming from the people in Treaty 3 and our gratitude for that. I come from the university, and oftentimes us academic types are very cynical. And sometimes there can be cynicism about land acknowledgements at the start of meetings. People may say that they're just words. But I always take the time to acknowledge that I still clearly remember growing up in a country where I never got to hear a land acknowledgement, even once growing up, and they still make me feel good. And it's always a pleasure to be able to acknowledge that history and our roots as a country. So for those of you that are not aware, we are doing a three presentation series over the next couple of weeks on allyship and reconciliation. And this session today will be recorded so that people can access it afterwards. It will also be shared with the Circle of Nations. But you don't need to worry. The only people that will be recorded are myself and Elder Kakfwi and Elder Bone, who will be joining me momentarily. And so we'll have a record of this discussion, which I know that you won't want to miss. We're in for a real treat in being able to hear from these two gentlemen. Having said that, please know that this is a very interactive session, and we welcome and invite any questions or comments that will be moderated by the people organizing behind the scenes, so that we can take every opportunity to respond to as many questions as we possibly can. So please don't be shy. We would love to hear from you. I'd like to take a minute to thank Natural Resources Canada for committing to these important principles. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to engage in dialogue and empower one another. I see reconciliation as an opportunity to be a part of solving a problem, of fixing a broken relationship, of being a part of positive change. Even though none of us are responsible for having created the challenges and the difficulties that we've inherited, we get to be part of the solution, and that's a wonderful gift. And I always acknowledge that that gift is something that was given to us by survivors of residential schools who gave us the opportunity to begin thinking about reconciliation. I'd also like to thank the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation here in Winnipeg for keeping these conversations alive and for facilitating a discussion like this. In particular, I'd like to thank Elder Harry Bone, who will be joining us very shortly, for his guidance in planning these and working with the NCTR staff to make sure that this will be a success over the next 3 weeks. This wouldn't be done in a good way. This wouldn't be done in a right way without acknowledging the guidance of elders. And when we use that term elders, many people often, prefer the term knowledge keepers. It's a position of trust and a position of responsibility in communities held by people who keep the teachings of the past alive and help guide us as communities in finding the best possible ways forward. You may not know the two individuals that are going to be on this call personally, but they have been instrumental in so many wonderful things and so many wonderful accomplishments, and with sharing so much of themselves with their communities and with the rest of Canada. I'm so excited that we get to be a part of this. Today, our focus is on treaty relationships. And again, we are fortunate to have Dr. Elder Harry Bone, who I see has just logged in and looking as handsome as always. Holy smokes, that's a good looking man there. And we also have Elder Stephen Kakfwi, who is going to be starting our conversation today. We're going to take about 40 minutes to let the two gentlemen speak, roughly 20 minutes apiece, and then we're going to open it up for conversations. I'm going to start with Elder Kakfwi, and we are so fortunate to have him joining us to start this discussion series. In the 1980s, Stephen served as a Dene leader and aided in land rights efforts and helped to develop a framework for land claim negotiations. He was elected to the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories in 1987, where he held several cabinet positions, including education, Aboriginal rights, resources, economic development, and constitutional development. Holy smokes, that's an impressive list of accomplishments. He also served as Premier for the Northwest Territories. Currently, he is a member of the National Turtle Lodge Council of Knowledge Keepers and the Governing Circle, and a Governing Circle member for the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. Stephen, it's an honor to have the opportunity to connect with you, to learn from you, to hear from you. If I could invite you to please get us started today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, and good day to all of you. I am going to speak about my own experience as a Dene growing up in my traditional territory. And in that we speak about the role, the importance, the significance, and the relationship that Dene have with their land. Dene, the very word, ties us to the land. Ne is land, the earth. When you say Newe Sine, you are saying the creator, the one who made the earth, Newe Sine. So when you say Dene, it means of the land, from the land. Our concept of ourselves is that we come from the very land that we live and stay on. One of the things that struck me as a young man in the 70s, when my father first started traveling in the South, I'm talking about Alberta, Edmonton, he went as far east as Halifax. And he came back from his very first trip and he talked about how astounded he was on clear days in June, flying for hours across Canada and looking at the land through the clouds and looking at all the roads, the farms, the fences, everything is cut up in rectangles. A little yellow here, green, all kinds of different colors. And some of them saw that this is what the future of our land would be if we opened up the country to oil and gas and mineral exploration. And so that was a lot of concern. The reports of our elders traveling in the South and looking at what they saw as a mass desecration of the earth. It was, I remember the stories of what they said. I mean, it was absolutely astounded to see so many lines cut into the earth. And here in the north, there is no roads. There's very few roads. There's no farms. They're just miles and miles of waterways, lakes, mountains, barren lands, fish lakes, but no farms, no roads. And so this was the impact that they had looking at what Southern Canada they could see had become. Growing up was also about seeing how every time our grandmothers and grandfathers and parents, uncles would go out in the land, that they would always, what they say now is paying the earth. They pay respect to the water and the land before they went hunting, whether they went with dog team or with a boat or on foot. They always stop someplace to make a fire or just stand in a quiet place to pay homage to the creator, to make sure that they were successful and that they did everything in a respectful way and that no harm came to them. Paying the earth, they also, as I said, when they made fire, then they fed the fire. They threw a little bit of food in the fire for our ancestors, those who have gone on to before us into the spirit world, to burn the food so that the smoke will carry that to them in the spirit world. This is what they did all the time. And, hundreds of us were sent off to residential school from a very young age, some of us as early as 5 or 6, and not allowed to stop going until you're over 14 years old. And so those practices were not as strong with us because, in my case, for instance, I left when I was 10 and again when I was 12 until I was 18. So all the knowledge I should have had about how to go out on the land, our relationship to the land, the place names, the legends and the stories, how to go into the mountains, how to go towards the barren lands, how to go to the fish lakes. I didn't have those things. And because of that, it also impaired my relationship with my father, my grandfather, my uncles, and my cousins, because all of them, every one of them, had become totally familiar with their land, right from the other side of the mountains into the Yukon to the Arctic Ocean, south towards the land of the Chippewa and the Cree. They knew all those, the place names, the legends behind creation, and I didn't. I went to school. I learned about math and biology and algebra and Shakespeare. And so when I got home, you could tell, all of us who had gone to residential school were not treated the same. We had to make an effort to learn how to hunt, how to hold a gun. That sounds like a simple thing, but if you've never held a gun in your life, it's awkward. It's like the first time you grab a guitar. It's awkward. You don't know how to balance it. You don't know how to handle it. You don't know how to carry it. And eventually everything becomes familiar though. Hunting with boats, outboard motors, paddling and hunting canoes, dog teams, snowmobiles, and then the name of all the places. So in this way, when I got out of residential school, I spent years and years, over 10 years, hunting in the company of my uncles, my cousins. And I bonded with them again because this is how we bonded as a family. Families bond through being on the land. You go fishing with your uncles, with your cousins, with your brothers. You go hunting. You prepare the meat and the fish. They tell you the name of the creek and the rivers and the hunting places where you go and the landmarks. This is the way we bond as a Dene people. And when that was taken away from us, it severed a lot of the relationship. It set back much of the relationship we should have had as part of growing up with our family. The land, we see it as our house. I know how people down in the cities live in Toronto, and Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Montreal. Some have condominiums, some have apartments, some have standalone houses. But for us, the entire land was our house. You're as familiar with what is on the other side of on what they call the Yukon Territory as you were with the Fish Lakes 50 miles north of you. It's just a different part of your backyard. It's a different part of your your house? Where do you get berries? Where do you get geese in the fall time? Where do you go for moose? Where do you go for caribou? And to this day, this is what we do. And you start to realize that we are so familiar with it that every last creek, every last lake, landmarks, they have a name and a story. Our land is riddled with places that are named from the time of creation. There's a rock that is at the mouth of Great Barrier River, for instance, where the super being named Yamoka, the one who knows everything about the universe, had been sent by the Creator to put balance in nature, to get rid of the animals that threaten the existence of people, the giant beaver, the giant flying eagles. Those creatures we have in our living memory. And it was Yamoriya who created a new balance of nature, got rid of the giant animals. So it set a better balance to allow for Dene people to live on their land without constantly being threatened by those animals. And we have to this day places, where giant beaver pelts were nailed up on the side of a rock, where arrows were shot into the river, where the fat from beaver that were slain, the giant beaver, are still burning to this day. It's seeping out of the side of the bank of what they call the Mackenzie River now. So this is what our relationship with is, the land. And to this day, like right now, about half of what I eat is it comes from the land. Moose meat, caribou, muskox, geese, ducks, whitefish, trout, cranberries, blueberries, all those things are in my freezer. It's given to me by friends. Some of it I've got myself. And this is how we live still. And in many of the small communities, like where I come from, Fort Good Hope, this is what people do. And it is what keeps our people strong, is the constant relationship, everyday relationship they continue to have with the land. It provides us with a diet, you might say, that few people in the world could afford. But on any given day, you could have geese, you could have ducks, you could have moose meat, you could have caribou, muskox, you could have trout, whitefish, all kinds of different fish, blueberries, raspberries. Yeah, it's all there. It's a huge storehouse, and we try to take good care of it because we know that is our bank. This is our insurance for the future. We try to take good care of it. So those are my comments, and I thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Language to you, Stephen. I'm always so grateful to hear from knowledge keepers like yourself that are able to remind us of a particular relationship with the living world. And your story of how residential schools maybe interrupted that relationship, but how you were able to return to it, reminds us of the opportunity that we have to reconsider our own relationships with the living world. I know that many of us find ourselves in a difficult situation where we have to balance modern lifestyles with some of these deeper principles of relationship and saving for the future and honoring that life. But it's a worthy conversation to be engaged with, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to hear from you.
Thank you.
Next up, we are going to hear from my dear friend, Dr. Harry Bone, who rushed to a stable internet connection so that he could chat with us. I know he's there with his son, another good friend of mine. If I could turn it over to Elder Harry Bone, if you would please talk to us about allyship and reconciliation, particularly treaties. Well, you're muted, my friend.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. It's always honored to be introduced by a knowledgeable person like Kevin. I've known Kevin for many years, and I've always admired his academic skills, but his personal skills as well. But today I'm deeply honored to be in the same audience and forum with Kevin, with Stephen, I mean. And then I think, it's always important, when Christine asked me, if I was going to speak earlier on, and I said, let Stephen do to honor, the great leadership that he's provided, in the political career that he had, and all the accomplishments that we had. So that, I said, I'll come second because, I think, we like to honor important people in our lives, and Stephen is one of them. So, I admire him because, I got to know him a little more closer when he's trying to join us at the Turtle Lodge with the National Elders Council, because I think, we have a universal group, that talks about who we are as an Indigenous people. But let me start by saying this, I certainly acknowledge, I certainly learned, a lot, from Stephen's comments, about the land. To us, the land is very important as well. I come from the prairies in Manitoba. I come from the western part of Manitoba, but I'm also very, very honored to be part of, just south of, there's our reserve is called Riding Mountain National Park. It's a national park. The national park, of course, as you probably know, was established to preserve and to protect the land and the environment in its natural setting. It's similar to the principles that we, of course, follow in our lives. But I think for me, as a young man, I grew up in the 50s and 60s. I mentioned those years for the simple reason is because that's a time that we had the option to attend a local school, not only a residential school. 1951 was the last major revision of the Indian Act, and there was an option for us to attend local schools if there was, and I did. The chief was pretty adamant that particular time that that I go to a local school, so I did. So I was raised there. But the reason why I mentioned that, because those were the years that we start to practice our traditions, our ceremonies openly. We start to speak our languages, and we start to make our connection to the land again, to understand who we are. Me too, that I was raised with all the environment, with all the food, from the natural world. But for us, I grew up with our teachings, from our elders and Anishinaabe elders. So that, I think, Stephen mentioned about how important our words are, like, the land. In our case, it's ake, and people like ourselves, the older men, in our generations are called akiwenzi, meaning that means Stephen will be akiwenzi, and Kevin would be young. But I think, the land is so important for us because, it's important. But I want to talk to the brief time that I have. Kevin, I'm not sure how much time I forgot. 20 minutes?
Kevin, yeah, about 20 minutes would be perfect.
Okay, yeah, because I don't want to drag it on, but I want to start off, by the teachings of our elders. And I always start off with these because these are the ones that, are fundamental principles in who we are as Anishinaabe people, as Indigenous people. And I was raised, by my grandparents. So the reason why I say that, my grandmother was born in 1880, so is my grandfather. But my grandmother in particular, because she was still familiar with the language that was used 150 years ago, the treaty making process, Treaty 4, Treaty 2 in our area. She was still familiar. Her dad was the chief negotiator there. So she understood what the spirit and intent of our treaties were, and what they meant to me. Not the written part, but the spirit and intent of our treaties, and the languages for our people. So the language that she speaks is from that era. So every time that I'm asked to do an opening prayer or speak in our language, then I use a language of my grandmother, the language that I've learned. And that's the language I use. It became very fluent, and because it's the language that I grew up with. In fact, when I first went to school when I was 7 years old, 6 years old, I guess, I didn't have a word of English. Ojibwe was the language I spoke. So actually, Anishinaabe is the first language. English is actually my second language. So I'm more comfortable in speaking my language every time that I get together with my people. But let me start by, those teachings that my grandmother and my grandfather taught me, at the time of treaty. As you probably know, the treaty making process happened 150 years ago, but we very much exist prior to that. Right down to the beginning of time, the creation of our continent and what we call Turtle Island. But the various teachings of our people has three fundamental principles that guides us who we are. The first one, of course, is that we believe in one creator for all of us, whether that's for me as Anishinaabe people or Stephen from the nation as well. From all nations, we all believe there's only one creator. To believe in our faith and our belief system, we come from someplace, through creation. So we know that, and that's our first the law that we respect, the creator's law as we seek the spiritual law. The second most important one is, of course, the natural law. It has to do with the earth, it has to do with land, it has to do with the environment. Because in our prayers, we thank the creator for blessing us, putting us on what we call Mother Earth, North America. Because we talk about how good it is, the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the environment that we have here, the trees and the plants, and all the medicines that we still have, from the wilderness, from our natural world. I think it's important. But the water is so important for all of us, because it's a gift, from a creator, that to live, peacefully with ourselves, in this natural world. So I think for all of us, that natural environment is the key thing for us for existence. Without the air, without the water, without the natural environment, we wouldn't be here. So that's our second law that we talked about, the natural law. We talked about. So every time we do it here, at least on Manitoba, Anishinaabe people, we have what we consider pipe ceremonies. If you ever witness an elder doing a pipe ceremony, watch them very carefully, and the directions that he uses. But the one that I particularly like to teach you, or at least make you aware of, is the 7 directions of the pipe ceremony that defines us, who we are as people, as nations, and who we are in the eyes of the creator, in the eyes of the natural world. And so that's what it is, because that's every time we do this pipe ceremony or this prayer reflecting those 7 principles that we have here, tells us who we as people. In fact, it's our constitution, it's our law, through that pipe ceremony, because it captures the 7 sacred principles who we are. One is to the creator, of course, as I mentioned to you. The second, of course, the natural world. The second sequence, environment, of course, is us as human beings, all of us. Whether you're indigenous, whether you're not indigenous, we're all equal in the eyes of the creator, all of us. We all have a chance to make a life of this environment, of this great earth. So those are the 3 great principles that we have here, that we always believe that the creator put us here, the creator looks after us. But also the land that we have here, in what we call Mother Earth. But we have 4 distinct gifts to be able to make sure, because we are gifted with no languages, we're given no teachings, we're gifted with to know who we are, our history. We're also gifted the way we make our journey from my birth time to the end of our time, in our lifetime. And the reason why we're given language is because we're given that obligation and responsibility to speak for the land, to speak for the land. The land, cannot speak for itself, but we are given the opportunity for us, that responsibility, that obligations. So that's why, some of our laws are a reflection of the natural world, of course, the creation, the natural world, so that's why, our laws come from there. So I think, for all of us, we're gifted with that. In our languages may be different, but, then the universal principle of our language are the same, the same principles. Like Anishinaabe nations, from Manitoba here, Cree Nations and Dene Nations as well. And also the Dakota Nations here in Manitoba as well. That's some that we work with. But for us, I think, the teachings that we have here, in our settings, of course, is the teachings that we learned, from 150 years ago, before even the indigenous, non-indigenous people came to it, now North America. The languages that they presented, but the teachings. In our case, one of the prairies is the Sundance, the Sweat Lodges, the Medarian teachings, Turtle Lodge, expresses one of those lodges that we certainly represent, our teachings. But for us, and it's all to do with environment. It has to do with all land. Then I must say that, as Stephen has mentioned, we have the obligation, responsibility to protect, and to make sure that the land is remembered as it should be, the way the natural world. So that's why when Parks Canada was established, some years ago, one of their principal foundation was, of course, to protect the natural world as it is. So that's what we are. We protect the land. We speak for the land. So that's what our ceremony is all about. So for us, as you probably know, that the climate change now becomes an issue for all of us. That's what the forefathers, so the elders before me and the elders before them, and the elders before them. All there's always going to be a difficulty, with the natural world, because Europeans are going to be here. Their respect for land is a little more different than ours, because their land, forest, they want to make money out of it. It's not like us. We want resistance for our people, but the land, for them is progress, meaning that they want to benefit out of that. So that's why Stephen talks about all the oil fields, all the mines, especially in the north and saying in the natural world. So that's why but we have a warning in this climate change that we have here today. We have a warning. We hear all over the world the fires that exist, the storms that are happening, where the water is being being abused as well. So I think we have a challenge, but we also have a responsibility in our lifetime to express who we are, through the environment. So the land is important because in the southern part, then we have big cities like here in Manitoba, we have Winnipeg, we have Brandon, we have the big cities. But now they're they're depending on also water, the air that we breathe. But of course, if it's a natural world, it turns into the oil fields, the mines, the coals, that kind of stuff happened in the past. I think creates a challenge for all of us. So that's the message that we like to provide as an elders, and the world that we have here, the natural world, the whole world is becoming at a situation where it's the crossroads, and where we going to start ending, making money off the land, concentrating on maintaining, the land as it was before, because the air now is affected, the water is affected, because we take a look at Stephen must experience this, because the oil fields and the mines, they're happening up in the northern areas, and as soon as they make their money, they're gone. Leave the natural environment, as it is for us to try and fix up. But for us, I think the land is important. That's our connection. We worship, towards that. Because in the environment, But where I am, south of Riding Mount National Park, that big park, that was established, 30 years. 1930s when the national parks were established. We maintain that big park, that big area. 40 miles, 20 miles square, that kind of stuff. It's a natural environment. Before the national parks were involved in it, there was oil. There was timber was was a big thing there. Coal, that kind of stuff, and the sawmills were very much if it wasn't for the national parks, their mission to protect the land, and that whole area would be all empty fields, for farmlands, that kind of stuff. But we also have within our national park a very sacred land, very sacred waters. It's called in the English language Clear Lake, but in our language is the shining water, because that's the only place here in Manitoba that has a clear water. If you look down, if you're in the middle of the lake, if you look downwards and go down to the bottom part, you can see the bottom. That's how clear the water is. And because we know that the water comes from inside Mother Earth. It's not snow water, it's not rainwater, it's not northern water from the creeks and lakes. It's the water that comes from underneath. So it's sacred water. So for us, that's why it's sacred. And that water is sacred to us, and because we use that. But I just want to mention, some of the bad experiences that I had, when the national parks were established here in Manitoba, in the prairies, as you probably know, in 1930, the Natural Resources Transfer Act came into being. And one of the conditions, of course, the federal government, they wanted to establish national parks. But we were also affected as treaty people. Treaty number 2 is where I'm from. When we got affected by that particular thing, because we had sacred places in Riding Mountains, like one of them is Clear Lake, and we worship the land, the water, that kind of stuff. And when the national parks was established, like we were literally kicked out of there, burnt out of there, because we were chased downwards down south, to the main reserve. And so in other words, we lost, our presence. We lost, the places that, we were used to, in our lifetime. And I think Stephen has mentioned about, the names of the places, the names of the rocks, the trees. We all have those. We have names that, in my area. We all know within Riding Mountains Tract. The rivers, the lakes, the creeks, the meadows, then we all have a name for them. We all have a name, for the environment, the birds, the animals and that kind of stuff. So whatever that exists there, we all have a name for that. That it's reference to the land. So I think we all know that Clear Lake is a tourist attraction as well, because the tourism is very important, but also for non-Indigenous people that come there to escape, their city environment. They come there for peace, to fresh air, that kind of stuff, and to hear the natural environment. So I think that we share some thoughts, some visions of our people, and as non-Indigenous people, at least in the south here, because now we're fairly crowded. I know where Stephen is, and there's still vast of lands that are empty, but in the south now it's all occupied, by us or Indigenous people or by businesses. But for us, I'm glad, that Christine has organized this arrangement, that we can have a discussion, we can have a dialogue, to talk about the land, I was honored that she asked me to be part of that, and I was more deeply honored when he said Stephen is going to be part of that process. And I was even more honored when he said Kevin is going to be the one hosting this. And of course, the people that are listening to us, so I also like to thank them. But I think for us, those 7 principles that tells us who we are as nations. I'll tell you why that's important, because that's our constitution. That's that's our law. That's what we established before the white man came to it. The reason of North America, before Indigenous people, before governments were formed, before Canada became a country, before the provinces were there. We had our own institutions. Those institutions were represented by the pipes, and the medals that we have now here, that kind of stuff. But I think that pipe is so important for us because it's a symbol, because it talks us about about who we are. Those symbols are very important. Same thing with you go to any court, you go to any institution, whether university or government, there's always a symbol of importance. So do we, we have that importance. What that pipe ceremony here, at least in Manitoba, that we do. But that defines us who we are, because just briefly, I just want to mention, for non-Indigenous people, for government people, they say, well, the treaties are no longer important. Well, we indeed, disagree with that. They're very much important because you're here as non-Indigenous people because of the land, because of the air, the water, the environment. So I think, you need to share that great responsibility to protect that land, because I think, all of us have a responsibility in our lifetime. So for all of us, in our treaty discussions, and we mentioned that the land is the foremost, in terms of who we are, because without the land, without what it has, and then we wouldn't be here. But I think briefly, and I just want to mention, for non-Indigenous people, they also base their constitution on certain principles. Like Canada, United States, there are certain principles that they use. And those principles are simply these: to be a land, to be a country, to be like, a country like Canada, the United States, you need to have land, you need to have people, you need to have languages, you need to have belief systems, values, you need to know your history, you need to have a form of government, and you need to believe there's something greater than you. Because I hear that word, every time you go to court, then you make an obligation to the crown. You say, so help me God, in God we trust. So in other words, even the non-Indigenous government, makes reference to the Creator, as we did. But those principles that I've mentioned, those are the very things that we practice for our pipe ceremonies, the seven directions. One to the Creator, one to the land, one to the people, and the four gifts that all people are gifted with, is our languages, and our teachings, in our history, to remember who we are, in our journey, in our lifetime, in a form of government. So that's who we are. So that's why our treaties are very much in existence, and because they're protected under the Constitution. Section 9124 still mentions us in the Constitution. Section 34, of course, endorses our legal rights. So even the Canadian court, the Supreme Court decisions have been in our favor. So we're here all together. We're here for sure. And many Indigenous people could never get rid of us. We're always going to be here because we're gifted with those seven principles, and we're gifted with our languages, and we maintain our languages. As you probably know, that the government 150 years ago, had a vision of their own to say that let's not honor the treaties. Let's establish a process where Indigenous people can forget who they are. So they established a legislation called the Indian Act to make sure that we're managed and we're controlled by the government because they consider citizenship. Further than that, they established residential schools. When that Stephen talks about to deny us our languages, our identity, our special relationship with the land, and protect our special relations with our families and who we are as Indigenous people. See, that's what the government did, but we maintain that through our elders, through our ceremonies. We're still very much in existence, will always exist. So that's why we're here today, as an Indigenous people. Here, at least Manitoba, we have a very good relationship, in terms of public education, public awareness, so that people become aware that what does the treaty really mean? It's about a relationship. It's about who we are as people. It's about the land. It's about the air. It's not who we are as people. So that's what it talks about. So I think, here, at least in Manitoba now, that we have a treaty commission that that Kevin and I part of, through Speakers Bureau, and also the education process. When we go to schools to teach young people, students, about what treaty is all about, the true history of First Nations people. Because as they probably know that, the writing of history hasn't been very good. That has been on the negative side. But the last 15 or 20 years, the writing of our people have been very good because some of us are our writers, that kind of stuff. So things are looking promising for us, and so our young people as well. Our young people also turning to our traditions. I recognize that because every time I go to Turtle Lodge, there's a bunch of young people that come to try and understand who we are as Indigenous people. But it's about land, and it's about a care. It's about who we are. So that's what it's important to. But I think, for all the natural environment, the natural resources that are there, must respect that, to have that balance, not to kill the land, not to destroy the water, not to destroy the air, and we all have a responsibility. So is the government, that kind of stuff. But I think we have that responsibility as well, to speak for it, to make sure that the land is protected the way it should have been. So I think for all of us, every time we get an opportunity to speak, to non-Indigenous people, we remind them our responsibilities. All of us who live here on this earth, that we have a responsibility, in our lifetime, to speak for the land and to protect the land as it is. So Kevin, I think then I'll close off there. Then if there's any questions, Kevin and Stephen will answer them. I'll just sit back. So thank you very much. And I'd like to thank again, for the people that are gathered to listen to us. I thank very much for Stephen for being part of this. I honor your leadership. Thank you very much.
So much, Elder Miigwech. There's so much in what both of you have shared. I feel so honored and so humbled to be able to have the opportunity to learn from you both. And I was thinking that if people are meeting you for the first time, both of you, they may not know exactly how deep the contributions both of you have made, have been for our community, for our people, and for the history of Canada as it begins to unfold in maybe a new direction. I would like people to know about Elder Harry Bone, that he is a member of Kisikoean First Nation, has served as chief and education director for that community. You also are a member of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Elder Council. And Harry was granted a honorary degree in law, and in 2017 was announced as an appointee to the Order of Canada for his contributions to advancing Indigenous education and preserving traditional laws, and for creating bridges between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples and communities. Both of you have done so much for younger generations like myself. I'm so grateful. I'm also grateful because you've opened up a conversation here that is so important. Both of you talked about how a relationship with the land is central not only to communities, but for identity, for belief systems, for value systems, and for our well-being. And you've also both hinted at the tension that exists between perhaps some of the ways that Canada has gone about relating to the land in terms of extraction and profit, and some of the deeper principles of relationship that elders have been reminding us throughout the years and are reminding us now as that relationship becomes more dire and more urgent with the consequences of climate change. One of the questions that people have been asking that I'm going to ask both of you to respond to is just simply about how allies, how non-Indigenous people can honor the original spirit and intent of the treaties. For people who are listening, our allies, our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters that are on this call today, what can they do to honor the original spirit and intent of treaties? And I'll turn that over to either one of you that would like to start first. The question is for both of you.
I can do that. You can hear me okay?
We can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. When I started my work in the 70s, that was one of the questions going south, because we made a declaration called the Tene Declaration in 1975. And the declaration basically said, we are a nation. We have our own land, our own history, our own language. We have our own laws, and we take care of, we have jurisdiction, we're sovereign in our land. We exercise our authority over our traditional lands. That was offending the federal government to a great extent. And but we were invited to speak at universities and church groups and TV shows, and that used to be one of the questions. And I think our answer was always, you should get to know who we are. You should come and study who we are. We are different people from coast to coast to coast. We have different histories, we have different customs, but we're all Indigenous people, and there's many things that we also have in common. You should respect the fact that we're a people. We're not wards of the state. We were not naturally Christians. We were Christianized by the government, by the churches. Most of us, without any choice. If the Catholics came first, we were Catholics. If the Anglicans came first, we were Anglicans. But that we have our own way of worship. We have our own way of praying. And Harry was speaking to that this morning. We have our own way of talking to the Creator. And what should Southern Canadians know? You know, it's not good enough just to say, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened to you. I know we didn't treat you well, and I'm sorry for that. Now, let's move on. You can't move on unless you know the nature of the damage and the injustice that was done to us. Our land was taken, so our land should be given back to us. Our sovereignty was diminished and restricted, that should be given back to us. We should not be wards of the state. There should be a fixed date by which every indigenous community, people, nation in this country get out of the clutches of the Indian Act. There should be a widespread national approach to saying, just as we did great damage to the German people, to Germany in the Second World War and Japan, and upon the conclusion of the Great Wars, we also went in there and we gave them hundreds of millions of dollars to rebuild themselves. The indigenous people all across this country have suffered for hundreds of years, and yet we are still here. So we need you to get to know us. You got to know the extent of the damage that was done to us. And we need a massive comprehensive response, just as it was called a Marshall Plan for the rebuilding of Germany after the Second World. We need something as comprehensive as that, not the piecemeal approach here, while we're going to make sure there's drinking water in every community across the country. Well, thank you. I mean, that's just what every Canadian is entitled to. It's beyond that. It's about returning the land. It's returning the dignity. It's letting us run our own affairs and exerting our own jurisdictions. Those are the things. So, but you cannot do it until you get to know us. And so I think every Canadian should know somebody. They should know somebody. They should know the history of our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that's well said. Let me just say this. I think it's important to know the original relationship of First Nations people and Indigenous people. And I want to mention just briefly, the question that we're always asked as Indigenous people, what is your contribution to nation building? Besides giving up, the land, where the land could be, used, for profit, that kind of stuff. Besides that, what is your contribution? But I want to mention just 4 key areas that we made a contribution. One of course, more than 500 years ago, when Europeans first arrived, we provided, the guidance, and this is where the lake goes, this is where the river is, this is how you've survived in this great wilderness to survive here. You fast-tracked the fur trade, the Great Hudson Bay Company. There was those demands and the commerce names and supply and demand. That there's a demand for fur that we were the suppliers. So we would develop a relationship. In fact, here in the prairies, we established principles, how we should negotiate. So those pipe ceremonies, those 7 directions that I meant, they were established at a particular time before Canada became a country. So I think it's important to know that. Besides also, what happened with the wars, with the English and French wars? I wonder where First Nations people were. Ask the historians, they have a different perspective. What about the American Revolution? As we watched on TV the last couple of days, what's happening in America? What happened yesterday? Gives us something to consider. Because at one time, when the American colonies were pre-established in the eastern part of Canada, those wars that happened at that particular time. But what they wanted to do was they wanted to come back and conquer Canada, which was when Eastern Canada at that time. First Nations were involved. That's why Treaty of Niagara is important. That's why that area of Niagara Falls is important, because of those monuments. We made a contribution, First Nations people. If it wasn't for First Nations people, we would have been Americans. We would have been glued to our TV, support or not support Trump. I think, but we're not. We're on Canadian side. We have our own land, that kind of stuff. And you fast track that, the contribution that we made about our land, especially in the prairies, to open up the northern immigration, to open up the railways, that kind of stuff, that contribution that we made. But we didn't ask, for the misery that we have here, for the underfunded that we have here, program and services. We didn't ask for that. We asked for opportunity. We asked for a chance to make a contribution as well, meaning that education and employment and that kind of stuff. Most of us have gone through that. We've gone through education. We've worked all our lives. We own property like Stephen and I, then we own houses. We pay taxes, just like anybody else. So I think, that contribution, but that awareness, that understanding, that dialogue is so important, because when the Treaty Commission was established here 10 years ago, one of the things that the academics, we assembled some of the best academics in Canada, understanding about history of Canada, they simply told us this at the end of 4 days. Your history has always been written by somebody else. By that somebody else is a European and Western perspective. They said, it's your turn now to bring justice to history, to talk about your perspective. So that's what it means. It's our side, it's our perspective. And I hope you have the ears and the willingness, and the free spirit to talk about who we are as Indigenous people, because that's what the public conscience is all about now. Because at that particular time as well, and there was something else happening. The general public, non-Indigenous people, we come to be aware of First Nations people, the issues, not only the negative ones, but the positive ones that's happening across Canada. In fact, Supreme Court decisions, by the way, that I was one of the fortunate ones, the elders to be asked to be part of, the Federal Court of Appeal judges when they came to Canada, because there's a Supreme Court decision that talked about about language, that oral history is now accepted in the courts of law. But they wanted to know what that oral history is all about. But I spent 4 days, and there's $80 and four judges at Turtle Lodge. 4 days, talked about about Indigenous law. But they gave us 1 day to us to talk about our side, to tell them. But at the end of the day, Chief Justice simply got up and said this: law has always been interpreted from two sources: civil law because of French, common law because of English. Now, Indigenous law is coming onto the scene. And that's why this dialogue is so important, to bring justice to law, to practice a law that the Supreme Court recognizes now. You have an obligation as non-Indigenous people to understand who we are. Not only to feel sorry for us or to apologize, like Stephen says, we don't need to apologize, we need an opportunity. We need you to listen to us. We need to have that dialogue. We need to have those ears that can be productive and make sure that you know the true history of what is now Canada. I think that's important. Those discussions now are happening, as Kevin will probably witnesses at institutions now across Canada. They're starting to bring in our people, our knowledge keepers to these environments to make sure that the knowledge is, is balanced, not only from the Western perspective, but also from our perspective. But I think, that's important. But it's an important part of also our nation building, to make sure that this great country recognizes the original foundational principles, who we are as nations, to respect one another as we respected non-Indigenous people to come and settle in our lands. And we welcome them. But we didn't ask for the misery that we have now in our communities. We didn't ask for the legislation that the government had asked. We didn't ask for the residential schools that created that mess for us. We created for ourselves the spirit within all of us. So that's why we're here. As I listen to the people like Stephen, about their experiences, and it tells us, our hope is bright. Our young people now, have a place. They can listen to our elders as well. So with that, thank you very much, Kevin.
Hey, Kevin. Kevin?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. I should mention that, it is in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report to deal with every province, every territory should deal with the curriculum in the schools to include the study of the history and culture of Indigenous people, and also the history of residential schools in Canada. In the Northwest Territories, we have been doing that for well over 10 years, 15 years now. It is required for graduation that every student study the culture, the indigenous history of the peoples within the Northwest Territories before they can graduate from grade 12. So even if you're lived all your life in Yellowknife, you're non-indigenous, you're required to know who the Inuvialuit are, who the Gwich'in, the people of the Decho, the Akecho, the Kashoutin, the Satu people. So when you go south and somebody says, hey, you're from Yellowknife, who are the Inuvialuit? You could answer the question and say it with pride and say, this is where I live. This is where I come from. And in the Northwest Territories, we live by consensus. We all take part in the decisions to do with land and resources and the decisions facing our government. It's a different kind of a society that we try to build up here. It's not based on parties. It's not whether you're conservative or liberal or NDP. But we now have in our curriculum the study of residential schools. So it is taught in our schools. And we have the curriculum now to teach the history and culture of all our Indigenous people. And this is what it's called for. And I remember when we had a national event of the Truth and Reconciliation in Edmonton, the acting premier of the day, plus the Minister of Education, went to the national event and publicly said, we commit to have the change in all the public schools in Alberta to include from kindergarten to grade 12, the history, the study of the history and culture of the Indigenous people of this country, and also the history of the impact and the colonization of people through residential schools. I don't know that they've moved anywhere since then, but I applauded the fact that they made that public commitment. I didn't hear it from Ontario or Quebec or New Brunswick. I didn't hear it from a lot of places because it costs money. It takes commitment, and most seasoned politicians, they shy away from those type of commitments. But this is what is required. So the Prime Minister, Trudeau, and naive as he was, he said, I'm going to implement all 94 calls to action. How long has it taken, to get legislation to adopt the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People? It could have been done in the second year of his term. How long does it take to draft up terms of reference for a National Council on Reconciliation as called for through the calls to action? It doesn't take more than 2 years. You go around, you talk to all the Indigenous people, and they tell you how they want it done. It's going to be like the Auditor General's function. They keep track of the commitments and the progress made by provinces, the federal government, the churches, civic groups on reconciliation. What is done, what is not done, what is well done, what is poorly done. It's kind of an audit of reconciliation right across Canada. That's what this council is supposed to do. And I don't think they're serious. I just don't think they're serious at all. But people tell me, well, be an optimist, don't give up. That's fine to say, I've been an optimist all my life. I'm 70 years old now, and now I'm saying I'm a realist. When Justin Trudeau says, I'm going to implement all 94, I say, yeah, right. I don't believe it anymore. I don't need the stress, and the empty anticipation of halls like that. We really need some movement. And where is it now? The churches have gone quiet. Everybody's quiet. We're preoccupied with COVID-19. This is the time when we should be sitting in our houses, in our little communities and family units, and talking about where are we as a country? Who are we and where do we want to go? I don't know what everybody else has been doing, but I think almost all the elders that I've talked to said, this is what we're doing, clarity of thought, clarity of purpose. And the rest of the country, I don't know what they're doing. You know, they're vacationing other parts of the country. They're, you know, they're not coming to our lodges for bannock and tea. You know, they're heading to the hot places. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm babbling.
Kevin, can I say a few words? I think that's interesting comments, Stephen. I think, you know, even though this COVID is right with us now, but as Stephen has mentioned, we're part of the Turtle Lodge National Elders Council. So we have Zoom meetings on a regular basis. In fact, right across Canada, from the East Coast to the West Coast to where Stephen is in all the prairies. So we meet by Zoom like what we're doing here. So that's to make that connection for all of us, and because the Spirit doesn't have any distance. But I just want to mention a couple things that are, I think, you know, that are so important. Why we need this dialogue, why we need to have a discussion with non-Indigenous people. And, you know, the government sometimes acts, you know, according to the public opinion. So that's why, you know, the public awareness of First Nations issues in a positive way is so necessary. Because, you know, if the public is aware of the true history of our people, you know, even up to date, the one that Stephen's talking about, even if they become aware, their public awareness becomes very important. Their public opinion matters. So that's what governs, you know, Canada and the provinces is public opinion. So if the public opinion is understanding of First Nations history, the government will do something about it. So that's why we need non-Indigenous people, not only to listeners, but also to make sure that, you know, we practice, you know, some of the things that we talk about. So I think that's very important, you know, that public awareness, that public education, that public, you know, that kind of stuff here. As Stephen has mentioned, because now we're also involved, you know, in treaty education. We've not taught it, you know, almost 3/4 of, you know, the teachers here in Manitoba. And the teachers have an open arm to reach out, you know, because we have 2-day sessions of teachers every month or so. But also, you know, the government, those calls to action that, you know, Stephen has mentioned, the federal government, the provincial government, the city of Winnipeg, and the institutions now are starting to reach out to us and come about, you know, how we can understand about your people. So there's that public discussion, that public awareness. So I think, you know, that's good for us, that's good for all of us, so that, you know, we can now start participate in a positive way, but also, you know, to be able to participate, you know, we need that commitment from many Indigenous people as well, to make sure that, you know, the government knows the way that they should be moving. So, but I think we're in the right time, you know, as Stephen is mentioning, you know, I know we're in our 70s, you know, I'm a little older than Stephen, you know, but, you know, but I think, you know, we're at that stage now, you know, we're not quite over the hill, and we're still on top of the hill, you know, we still got some room to move. So with that, Kevin, I thank you very much, you know, and Stephen, for your nice comments. You got you.
Thank you so very kindly. You know, both of you have spoken to very, very big issues that speak to the heart of business as usual in Canada. But you've also given us practical things that we can do. I take to heart the message about being in relationship and about making sure that our voices are heard and demanding of our leaders that this remains a commitment. Of course, this is only the start of the conversation. It will continue over the next 2 weeks, but I want to say thank you very kindly, Miigwech Nibawa, to both of you for sharing with us, for guiding these conversations. I want to say thank you to the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation for organizing this. And I want to say thank you to Resources Canada for making this possible. To everyone that was a part of this call, to all of our brothers and sisters, I wish you all the best. I say miigwech for being a part of this, and please join us again for the continuing conversation in the series.
Okay, thank you. Merci.